Today on CityCast Boise. Recently, the FBI launched an investigation into a mysterious local religion that has no name. KTVB's Morgan Romero is joining us to break down what she learned while investigating the alleged abuse allegations. She'll share why it's so hard to find any information about the group and how their secretive practices may have created the perfect environment for predators. This episode discusses potentially upsetting information. It's Thursday, August 29th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. This is a wild topic, and it can get really confusing really fast. So just right off the bat, this church that we're talking about has no name. So what do they call themselves, or what are they known as?
Yeah, so it's different between people who are on the inside of this sect versus people who are on the outside. So people on the outside call them the 2x2, the 2x2s, because the ministers travel in pairs, or they call them the church with no name. People on the inside call it the truth or the way more often than not.
Interesting. So I'll probably be referring to them as 2x2s, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that there's a lot of names for this organization.
Yes.
And where in Idaho are there congregations or members of this religion? Like, where are they located?
Yeah, so it's really all throughout Idaho, and it's all throughout the country, and it's all throughout the world. It originated in Ireland, and then it spread over to America. But here in Idaho, we have members everywhere. I talk to former members who are in Meridian. I talk to former members who are in Boise. They have a big annual convention every year in Parma. And that's where there's a big field and they meet there yearly. But there's people in North Idaho too. And each different region is kind of divided up. For example, Southern Idaho is with Eastern Oregon. North Idaho is with Washington. So it's subdivided in different regions. But interestingly, there's no physical location that they meet as like a congregation. So they try really hard to not be like other churches. We try to refer to them as a church or a sect, but they don't have a physical building that people go to consistently.
What led to the FBI to begin investigating the 2x2 church, especially in Idaho?
Yeah, so my understanding of it, and this is being led by the FBI Omaha field office. So our field office here is not involved in the investigation. However, they are aware that there are survivors here in Idaho as well. But essentially, it's kind of convoluted, but essentially what happened was there was this individual named Dean Brewer. He was what they refer to as an overseer. So there's, a dozen overseers all throughout the country. He was based in Oregon, but oversaw Idaho as well. Okay. He died a couple of years ago. And after he died, people started coming out of the woodwork and saying, Dean Brewer is a serial rapist. They were accusing him of years and years of sexual abuse of children and adults. And again, he's the top head honcho, one of the head honchos of this organization. And then that really opened the floodgates for a bunch of other people to come out, hundreds of people to come out and say, not only Dean Brewer, but all these other elders, overseers, ministers, even just members in the organization sexually abused me as well when I was a kid, or sexually abused my family member. And, unfortunately, some of those alleged perpetrators are dead now. But that started coming out, and then all these allegations, this is really on social media. It took it by storm. I'm not exactly sure how the Omaha office got involved, like whether somebody went to them or whether they saw all of this coming out. But it is very recent, and it all started coming out in the last couple of years.
With the death of that particular church leader.
Yeah, and people really coming forward on social media. And again, I don't know how many people nationally went to their individual sheriff's office or police department or, attorney generals or their FBI field offices. It's really difficult with the FBI. They don't always say how they got involved. They won't really elaborate beyond, especially if an investigation is active, they won't really tell you what the catalyst really was.
No, that makes sense, especially if this is an ongoing and new investigation. Do you know, were there any alleged perpetrators preaching or living or working in Idaho?
Yeah, so obviously we know the number of alleged perpetrators is a fraction of how many occurrences actually happen because so many people don't come forward. But at least in Idaho, based on the data from a private investigator and what she's conveyed to me, at least 15 possible perpetrators have lived or worked, so like worked as ministers in Eastern Oregon and Idaho. And in fact, 6 members from this region have been convicted for sex crimes. And I'm not able to personally verify that they were members of the church, but I spoke to several people who have intimate knowledge and have ties to the church and know that these 6 people were members or currently are still members. So yeah, so again, at least 15 possible perps over the last several decades have lived or worked in Eastern Oregon and in Idaho.
And 6 have already been convicted.
And 6 convicted. Yeah. And that doesn't count even the people that come through Idaho just for convention or like stayed here for a little bit, and those are just people that we know have served in the ministry or are members or elders in the organization.
Something that I found really interesting is that it's pretty difficult to find information about this church, which is really uncommon in the internet age. And there really is a lot of secrecy about what the church is, what they believe. Were you able to find out more about how the 2x2s structure their membership and their leadership and maybe how that might have contributed to this situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that really is the fundamental part of how, these allegations have gone undisclosed for so long is because, by its nature, this church is very secretive. My understanding after talking to historian Sherry Kropp, she's like the expert. She's a former member. She's the true holder of information really in this organization because she has like really looked into the history for herself. She's traveled, she's talked to people. She basically said the organization doesn't write its own history. It doesn't keep records. Unlike the Mormon church, for example, which is extremely diligent. Yeah. This sect doesn't publish anything about its history. It doesn't really keep records. And so the structure is that it's, like I said, at least like a dozen, my understanding, at least a dozen overseers, which are the highest level. Under them is ministers, and those are the people that go and preach in pairs. They're not actually really taught any theology. They say, I feel called to serve in the ministry. I want to go be in the work, as they call it. And then they get assignments for periods of time. Same sex, you have to go. If you're a woman, you go with another woman. If you're a man, you go with another man. So, for example, if you're assigned the work in Southern Idaho, you live in members' homes. So you give up your belongings. Their whole idea, based on this historian Sherry Kropp, the whole idea is to get back to like the fundamental nature of the New Testament. And they try to get people from the outside involved in the organization, but it's not as public. Like, you probably don't know anybody in this organization, and there's not that many members. I mean, there's 700 about right now and dropping every day in the state of Idaho. And so it's kind of like word of mouth, or it's generational. You're involved in this organization because your parents were, for example.
From what you're saying, it sounds like there's a lot of transientness to the organization and situations where people who feel called to preach or to, be missionaries, I guess, or
ministers, workers.
Yeah, ministers and workers are staying in people's homes that they don't know and aren't familiar with. Do you feel like all of these elements have contributed to an environment where abuse could occur and easily be covered up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what all of these survivors have said is the structure of the organization, the secrecy, the intrinsic secrecy, the fact that they live in members' homes, maybe next to children, sleeping in rooms next to children could certainly lead to that. And the fact that these people, these overseers, these ministers, these elders in the organization are put on a pedestal. And based on my conversations with survivors, it's like any religion, right? How could they know? The dichotomy is so great. You can't, in your mind, you can't really make that leap of saying, oh, this servant of God did something so dark, So yeah, it's fear. These people have so much fear. Really, a fundamental part of this church is that they believe that they are the only way. Again, they call themselves the truth, the way. They are the only way to heaven. All other Christian faiths, even though they believe the same things fundamentally that this organization believes, all other churches are false. So from birth, you're taught to like conform. You're taught, you have the fear of God in you, that if you leave this church, if you say anything bad against these overseers, these ministers, that you're not going to go to heaven. Right? So it's scary.
No, and I can really relate to that because I also grew up in a religion that taught that same thing. And that is really powerful. That is a really powerful tool to keep you committed, to keep you are able to overlook a lot of things, a lot of potential issues. If you think this is your one shot at heaven, if you think this is what God wants you to be doing, that is a really potent religious teaching.
Yeah, that's so well said. And you've got to feel for these people who, again, like I said, they don't know anything outside of this. This is their entire identity. Like many of the survivors I talked to, they went to public school, but the church doesn't allow them to have friends outside of the way. Their whole life revolves around this. And there's so many rules about this organization that I couldn't even get into in my story. But like, women can't cut their hair. Women can't wear pants. Women can only be nurses, teachers, secretaries, or they need to stay home. It's very regressive thinking. It's the repression of women in this organization. And again, going back to what leads women to not speak up. And not only women are victims, men too, but that's what leads so many of them to not feel like they have a voice, is because they're really viewed as second-class citizens in this sect.
Maybe this is more of a technical question, but I'm just really curious. So this church has no name. Are they like a legal entity? Have they filed as, different churches will be nonprofits or 501c3s or, just there's different things churches can be. Is this group any of those things?
No. And that leads back to your question about secrecy. Like intrinsically, it is so secretive. It is not set up as a nonprofit. It doesn't have any official legal standing. It's sort of, from the outside world looking in, it seems extremely informal, but from the inside, it's quite formal. And they believe that there is an organizational structure to it and a hierarchy to it. But no, from the outside, we don't view it. It's not a traditional church, no.
In your coverage of this investigation, it really seemed like people who had left the religion were still scared to openly talk about what they saw, what they experienced. Is that because of maybe the church's doctrine or teachings, or more because of the insular culture of the religion?
Both, right? Anybody who's been in a group like this can understand that, your whole life, your whole identity is wrapped up in this. And for one of the women that I interviewed who wanted to be anonymous, her husband is still in. So she and her daughter left, her parents left, her sister and her in-laws left, but her husband is still in. And she has so many friends who are still in the organization. And she said basically they would view it as blasphemy if she were to talk about it publicly. But she really wants them to open their eyes and see this and know what's going on and realize that there's no change happening. They've tried. Her parents were on committees. Her parents were really high up in the church, like really highly regarded here locally in Boise, and sat on committees, came up with recommendations on task forces to serve to leadership. And basically my understanding, what she said, Deanne, is that leadership looked at that and said, nah, we're going to do it our way. So, for her, it's the fear of losing so many friends, of disparaging them, but also the fact that, again, going back to, you're instilled from the time that you are born, you are told to live in fear, essentially, and then you're also told not to trust your gut. So she's been in a lot of therapy and she's been working through this of like, who am I and what should I trust and who should I trust? And it's really sad.
Yeah, no, working through those really fundamental issues after leaving religion is really hard work to do. Mm-hmm. And not only, you mentioned like losing friends and things, and that is really, really hard. But does this church have like formal repercussions for people who leave or speak out against the actions of the religion?
Not to my understanding, no. But the leaving is the hard part, right? From my understanding, it's not like you can formally be, excommunicated like they do in other faiths if you were to speak up. But that has stopped a lot of people from speaking up, is just the fact that they have family and friends still in it. But no, my understanding is that there's no formal repercussions.
And when you spoke to these former members, do they feel like the church took measures to prevent abuse at all?
No, that's their biggest argument. There are hundreds of alleged perpetrators, almost 1,000 alleged perpetrators, and again, they believe that's just a fraction of how many are really out there. And all of that, they say, was covered up. The people that were accused were just moved from one region to the next. They were told they couldn't have meetings in their home. Maybe overseers met with them recently as the public pressure has come on. But my understanding is many of those members with allegations against them are still able to go to meetings. They're still able to be involved. They're still able to attend church. For example, one of the survivors that I interviewed who left the church several years ago, she used to be a minister. And she, as she got older, the trauma started resurfacing, and she discovered she was abused as a child. And she said, to her understanding, the man that abused her was just no longer allowed to have meetings in his home, but he was still able to attend meetings. So no, there's no accountability. And I did get a statement from the overseer here locally, Doyle Smith, who said, we take these allegations seriously. We want our ministers to be trained in ministry safe. But everybody should be a mandatory reporter. Everybody is on the hook, if you hear of allegations like this, to go to law enforcement, right?
Absolutely.
But because they're not a formal organization, some survivors believe that they're able to just kind of like stay under the radar and feel like these rules don't apply to them, right? The societal rules don't apply to them.
And were there, we've talked about this kind of loose organizational structure, or it kind of appears loose from the outside. Were there any structures in place for reporting or reporting to someone higher if you don't feel like it's being handled in your local community?
Yeah, so from my understanding from the people that did report, and again, many of them didn't, but from the people that did report while they were in the church, they went to their regional ministers. So those are the people that were preaching in pairs. They would go to them, and then the ministers would maybe handle it among themselves, or maybe they'd go all the way up to the overseer. But based on what survivors said, is for those who did report, they would tell their parents, the parents would tell the ministers, and then the buck really stopped there, or it would stop with the overseer. And there's no like formal process for what happens to these alleged perpetrators afterwards.
I'm really curious, what kind of an impact has this investigation had on the current or former members of the church in our area?
Yeah, based on the survivors I talked to and the historian I talked to, people are leaving in droves. People are seeing this, and the church will say, don't look at the internet, don't look at, they're not allowed to have TV, so don't watch these stories. But there's a documentary on Hulu. The BBC has done coverage. Now I've done coverage here locally, and people are seeing that, and they're talking, and they're saying, we got to get out, because now, again, going back to what Deanne said, her family has tried to make change happen in the last 2 years, and they didn't see it happen. They went and they did the work themselves. They spoke to survivors. They spoke to leadership. Nothing happened. And so my understanding is that, based on Facebook groups I'm a part of now, is that every day, dozens of people all over the country are leaving.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I know this is such a heavy topic, and there's a lot here. So thank you so much for taking the time to break it down and explain what you found.
Yeah, you bet. Really, really fascinating. And I appreciate you guys giving us a platform.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, make sure and subscribe to our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our Friday News Roundup. See you then.